Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Brian Kane, and I am a Master in Public Policy candidate at the Harvard Kennedy School and a member of the Harvard Circular Economy Symposium. I will be the facilitator of today's discussion and Q&A. The Harvard Circular Economy Symposium and Harvard Business School's Business and Environment Initiative are very excited to have such an esteemed panel of guests to discuss financing and scaling circular economy business models. Today's event will run as follows. Each of the panelists will spend a few minutes introducing themselves, their organizations, and responding to one short question from me. After these introductions, we will field questions from the audience. Please ask all questions in the Q&A feature of Zoom, and note that all other guests will be able to see these questions as soon as you send them. If you would like to ask your question aloud, please still type it in the Q&A box, then raise your hand using the raise hand feature. If you don't raise your hand, I will read the question to the panelists. Please note that respectful dialogue is a hallmark of the Harvard community. We ask that everyone follow the HBS community values, including respect for the rights, differences, and dignity of others, honesty and integrity in dealing with all members of the community, and accountability for personal behavior. With that, let's get started. We're going to Ashleigh Morris first. Ashleigh is the CEO and co-founder of Coreo, a globally recognized and awarded company that advises and guides industry through their circular economy aspirations. Ashleigh, please briefly discuss Coreo, your professional background, and answer the following question. What were some of the opportunities for circular solutions you saw in Australia that prompted you to found Coreo?
Awesome. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion with my fellow panelists. As Brian said, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Coreo, but just to tell you a little bit more about who we are and what we do. At Coreo, we are strategic advisors, project partners, and all-round doers who take the circular economy out of theory and put it into practice. For us, the transition to a circular economy is systemic, and as such, we work in all key sectors of the global economy, from mining all the way through to education, tourism, construction, and property. We essentially call ourselves industry agnostic. We prioritize working with clients that will have, and clients and projects that will have the greatest impact on the consumption and production of materials, but also the regeneration of our natural systems. And we find ourselves most often helping organizations and governments answer three key questions. What is the circular economy? No, really, what is it? What value can it contribute to my company, to my shareholders, to my community? And the third one, but certainly not the least important, which is where do I actually start? People often say, literally, how do I enter this circle? So for us, we're very much about supporting industry and government to answer those questions and then taking the action to actually realize the value of a circular economy. And Brian, to answer your question, what opportunities prompted me to found the company in 2017? Well, in all honesty, in Australia, there was really a lack of tangible evidence of anyone taking a systemic approach to the circular economy. My sister and myself actually run this company together, and it was through a very passionate conversation about the state of the world in 2017 from our bedroom floor. We wanted to see change. We believed circular economy could be that change. And when we looked around the Australian market, there was just nothing. There was no policies, there were no major projects, there were no strategies by our major industries. So as two bold and passionate women, we took it upon ourselves to found Australia's first systemic pilot project. One city street we worked on for 6 months for free, testing 6 different circular economy concepts. We had a very successful experiment, and today we're now Coreo, and we're proud to have worked with over 80 different organizations implementing the circular economy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. All right, next we're moving to Jessica Long. Jessica is a managing director at Closed Loop Partners, a New York-based investment firm that provides equity and project finance to initiatives at the forefront of the development of the circular economy. Before joining Closed Loop, Jessica literally wrote the book on these topics in her Circular Economy Handbook. Jessica, please describe Closed Loop's work, your background, and then please discuss how Closed Loop leverages systems thinking to help scale circular economy business models.
Great, thank you, Brian. And I'm also just so excited to be here today and for this discussion. I think it's It's both critical and timely, given where we are in the world today and all the concepts around building back better. In terms of closed loop partners, Brian, to your point, Closed Loop Partners is a New York-based investment firm and innovation center focused solely on advancing and accelerating the circular economy. From an investment firm perspective, we provide financing across the entire arc of capital that a company might need, focused on circular economy. So everything from catalytic impact first financing to venture-based financing, growth equity, all the way through to private equity. So again, looking at the full spectrum of what a company might need. And we look across multiple sectors. So plastics and packaging is a very big focus for us, electronics and e-waste, fashion and apparel, food and agriculture, and then a lot of enabling things like supply chain and supply chain technologies. And then, as I mentioned, we also are an innovation center, and our innovation center focuses quite uniquely on research, but also on problems that may not have a great solution today. If we thought there was a great solution, we'd probably invest in it. So we often bring companies together, oftentimes in pre-competitive collaborations to solve tough challenges like the single-use retail bag, right? Or the fiber cup that's used for hot and cold beverages, advanced recycling, compostable packaging, right? A lot of these concepts that are out there that maybe we don't have, a great answer or great answers to today. In terms of your questions around systems thinking, I'm sure that's going to be a big part of the conversation today. And I think one of the challenges is the word systems, or the term systems-based thinking can mean a whole bunch of different things. So maybe let me just share 3 different ways that we take a systems-based approach to circular economy. One is, first and foremost, we look at the system from kind of an end-to-end value chain perspective. So that perspective aiming, of course, to move from today's very linear take, make, waste model to one that is circular and regenerative, a lot of the things that Ashleigh mentioned in her opening. So instead of focusing on just one part of the value chain, like manufacturing or recycling, we really look across the entire value chain, from design, sourcing, procurement, manufacturing, logistics, right, all the way through use, collection, take back, and reprocessing. So taking that full end-to-end value chain approach. Second, again, from a systems perspective, we like to look at systems from a materials perspective, which often crosses multiple sectors and multiple industries, right? It's not as easy just to look at one company or one sector, even when I'm taking a materials perspective. So for example, if I take something as simple, or what seems simple, like a plastic bottle, right? I probably need to engage the chemicals industry. I probably need to engage the packaging and the packaging producers, or plastics and packaging producers. I need to engage consumer goods companies, retailers, the haulers, the collection systems, all the way through folks that are taking that material back. And in some cases, that plastic bottle might turn back into a plastic bottle, but in other cases, it might go into a very different sector, like textiles and apparel or automotive. So it might need to engage a completely different industry, right, as well. And then finally, we take a systems-based approach from a broader enabling environment perspective. Clearly, given the firm that I work in, we are deep, very, very deep in the critical role of financial services and providing financing within the circular economy, both to catalyze solutions as well as scale them. But we also know that there's other hugely critical enabling factors, like the role of policy, right? The role of engaging consumers and consumer behavior, the role of education, the role of technology, as I mentioned earlier, with supply chain. So I think there are all of these critical actors that have to come together to really, as kind of pieces in a puzzle, to solve this from a systems perspective. So again, happy to talk about those in more detail. And again, I'm sure that will be a topic of today's discussion as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jessica, for being here. All right, third, we have John Bissell. John is the co-CEO and co-founder of Origin Materials. Origin Materials develops technology that traps carbon from the atmosphere by making new materials from wood. John recently led his company through a merger with a special purpose acquisition company, or SPAC, called Ardius Acquisition. Now, John, please describe Origin Materials' work, your background, and then could you briefly explain the process of and motivations for being acquired by a SPAC?
You got it. Yeah. So okay. So I'm John. My background is chemical engineering originally. So I'm sort of a technical founder from that perspective. I started the company in 2008. So quite some time ago, and kind of an interesting time to start a company from a financing perspective. There wasn't a lot of financing going on in 2008. And we've sort of experienced that all the way through. The financing environment has never been frothy, let's call it, for circular economy or materials more broadly, et cetera. What Origin does specifically is, as Brian mentioned, it takes wood or lignocellulosic inputs and it converts that into two intermediates. Those two intermediates are sort of our unique specials, sauce, whatever you want to call that. And we take those intermediates and we convert them into a whole bunch of materials. We're starting with PET. And so we have a whole bunch of customers that are lined up around PET. But all in, soup and nuts, what this means is that we can make PET that's not just net zero, but actually slightly carbon negative. And we can do that for a whole bunch of other materials beyond PET as well, even though we're focused on PET right now. And so by being able to do that, we take a material like PET, which is, we can get into a discussion on this, but I think PET is actually one of the best materials from a circularity perspective when it's used properly, because it's so recyclable, right? And there's actually infrastructure for it and people really can recycle it, all those kinds of things. And you take something that's one of the best materials from a circularity perspective, and you make it significantly lower carbon footprint, which is a big deal. And so because of that, you can drop that straight into the existing supply chain. And that's brought some really large customers to the table for us. So Nestle, Danone, and Pepsi are three big announced customers, much larger customer base than that, but we don't always talk about all the other ones by name. So that's sort of the company as a whole. So PET, platform technology, we think of it as like the new ethylene. We can make all sorts of stuff. PET is the first one for a whole bunch of reasons. As you mentioned, Brian, we just entered into a SPAC transaction. We're in that process right now. I don't know if you guys are all familiar with SPACs, but it's sort of the new hotness in terms of the way to IPO. And it's effectively just a different route to an IPO. But one of the interesting characteristics of it that made it attractive for us specifically is that you tend to have larger cash proceeds for a given valuation of company in SPAC transactions. So for an IPO, you might be looking at 5 or 10% of the total value of the post-IPO company in terms of cash that's actually invested into the company by the public markets. Whereas with a SPAC, you can have significantly more than that, right? So in our case, we're getting nearly $1 billion of capital that we can use to deploy our technology more broadly and manufacturing technology more broadly. And that's a huge amount. We would have to be a much larger company than we are now, typically, for that kind of capital to be invested into the company as a result of a traditional IPO. And so that's why the SPAC transaction made sense for us, given the context of the environment and all those kinds of things. Yeah, so I think that's the summary.
Great, thanks so much, John. And actually, quickly, could you define PET for some of our attendees that might not be familiar with the acronym?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's one of the curses of living inside the chemicals and materials environment. Is there are lots and lots of materials that feel like they're incredibly obvious everyday items to me that are actually somewhat esoteric. So PET is what bottles are made out of typically. And what's interesting about PET is it's actually a really widely used material. So it's used in bottles. That's where people recognize it. It also gets used in food packaging more broadly. So a lot of the clamshells and things like that you find are actually made of PET as well. Those are typically made just in a different way. So same material, just used differently. And then it gets used in a bunch of applications that are sort of invisible for people. One of those is invisible because people don't realize it's PET, which is polyester clothing. So polyester and PET, same stuff, broadly speaking. It's just spun into fibers. What's great about PET in fibers is that it's usually displacing cotton. So the alternative is cotton generally. And cotton is a crop that likes to grow in the desert that likes a lot of water, right? And so that's sort of a bad combination, generally speaking. And so cotton production is pretty stagnant relative to the total growth of demand for fibers. And so almost all of the balance there is being supplied by PET. There's some other synthetic fibers like polypropylene, et cetera, that are interesting, but really PET is the fiber that's providing the material and the volume of material that we need for clothing. What's interesting about that is the PET from fiber is technically recyclable, but there is not the existing supply chain. And frankly, there haven't been enough technology stood up to actually practically recycle that fiber. So we have this sort of reservoir, latent reservoir of potentially recyclable material in PET fibers and apparel and textiles, but we're not actually recycling it right now, which just gets into some of the details around that. And we can talk about some of the, why that might be if you guys want to. And then the final thing that's really interesting about polyester is polyester actually ends up as a structural material quite regularly too in things like automotive applications. So you see that, so tires, if you break down a tire, for example, it's a highly engineered, we think of it as just a big dumb piece of rubber tube, but actually it's one of the most highly composite engineered materials on the planet. And if you break that down, what you'll see is that there are dozens and frankly hundreds of different materials that have been layered in a very specific engineered way. One of those is actually PET. So PET gets used as the tension cord inside of a tire, which is one of the reasons why tires last so long now, right? So if you go to tires back in the 50s and 60s, they might last 5,000 miles, and it's not at all uncommon to find a tire that can last 80,000 miles now. And so PET is one of many materials that enable that to happen, but it's being used in a way that is enables us to waste a lot less stuff in that particular case. So that's PET. Sorry.
Great, thank you very much. All right, last but definitely not least, we go to Dr. Martin Stuchtey. Martin is the founder and managing partner of SYSTEMIQ, an organization driving systemic change in clean energy, circular material solutions, and sustainable land use. Prior to founding SYSTEMIQ, Martin worked at McKinsey for 20 years, most recently as the director of the Center for Business and Environment. Now, Martin, please describe SYSTEMIQ, your background, and then could you explain what prompted your decision to leave McKinsey and found SYSTEMIQ? What weren't you getting at McKinsey that you needed SYSTEMIQ to do?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks for the kind invitation. Who would have thought that there would be a circular economy symposium at Harvard one day? When I started to work on this, when 2008, that was on the rim of my imagination. So that's really good. So my name is Martin. I'm a geologist by training. I'm a farmer. I'm a university professor, and then I'm an entrepreneur. I think that's what got me here today, of a company called SYSTEMIQ. Still quite young. In fact, we are turning 5 tomorrow, and birthday preparations are in full swing as we speak. It's a small company of 250 people. We are in 5 countries, and it's, I guess, the result of an eureka moment. We all have that all of a sudden we start seeing the world in a completely different way, and then we can't change back without not being true to ourselves. That happened to me during my McKinsey years, which was great. 20 years. I'm proud of it. It was gorgeous. Learning, discovery, confidence building. I worked across every industry, function, continent, at one stage, and that was in 2006, I guess, that was the year of the inconvenient truth, the Stern report of a very stormy winter in Europe. We decided that we can't escape scientific truth, and there is just no way not to be working on what matters most. And that's when I joined forces with a couple of colleagues to create what then was called McKinsey Sustainability and Resource Productivity Practice. And we had great 8 years. So we worked on in preparation for Copenhagen on the carbon cost curve. We helped create the Water Resource Group at the World Economic Forum, the Marshall Plan for the Oceans with the Global Ocean Commission, the RED work in Indonesia. And most importantly, I started writing about zero waste and these issues. And then in 2009 or 10, I met with who's now a very close friend, Alan MacArthur, and when we discussed, can we actually describe what this idea of circular economy, to what extent it's better for the economy, for business, and for the planet. And then we started working on it and writing these early reports, drawing the butterfly chart. But then there was a moment where we found out that we're too slow. We are far too slow, and we are not up against a problem that is big, that is deep, and that is also systemic. And that's the moment where, first of all, I receded a bit to write the Good Disruption book in order to convince myself, and then we started Systemic. That was together with Jeremy Oppenheim, with Janis Potočnik, who's still a partner of Systemic, Michael Braungart, who some of you will know, and off we went. At Systemic, the system is the client, not the client is the client, the system is the client. And at Systemic, we try to make system change a new profession. And in order to do that, we pick a couple of subsystems or systems in the area of new land use, new energy, or new circular industrial systems that we think are ready for disruption. So when we ask ourselves, how can you really create a circular plastic economy? And John sort of is in the middle of that. How can we create markets for the ecosystem services that tropical forests provide? How can we get the flywheel of green hydrogen markets going? How can we actually create a system where it pays to have a circular car? How to create a market for to captivate or to capture fugitive methane and make it a profitable business? How to create a seaweed market, one of the few industries that we really could imagine at large scale to be biodiversity and climate positive. And then we always do four things. First, we try to describe what's the target system for this system, and typically we rally a whole bunch of CEOs into a coalition, and we start to describing it in the form of a new plastic economy, in the form of a Energy Transition Commission report, in the form of a blended finance task force. Then we work with some selected pioneers, shoulder to shoulder, and then we incubate solutions. So far, we have created 3 companies and invested in 12. Where we, of course, we have our own balance sheet. And then we work lastly with institutional investors in large funds who are desperately looking for a systemic investment opportunity. And we are counting and measuring the assets that we have under influence. We try to do this both at a macro scale, like writing the Breaking the Plastic Wave report, or on the micro scale, like serving 4 million people in East Java with a circular waste and recovery and recycling management system. And we always try to do this in the way that we try to mirror to the inside what we want society look like on the outside. So we are a net zero company, we are majority female, we are self-organizing, we are B Corp and committed ourselves to positive societal outcomes. So in a way, it's not really, it's an experiment. It's not a company, it's an experiment of whether you can be commercially successful and whether you can create value. That's perhaps the better word, whilst being concerned about nothing else but attaining the Paris climate commitments and the SDGs. And so far it has worked very well. So I'm in a pre-birthday evening mood, sort of recollecting 5 very demanding but rewarding years. And of course, that's particularly owed to sort of some investors who came on the way, many corporations who trusted us, government agencies, foundations, but particularly the young talent. So there is they are starting to see that this is the best way to have a rewarding, inspiring, and intellectually challenging career in the 21st century.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Martin. And thank you everyone again. Now we are going to move to the Q&A portion of the event. As a reminder to all of our attendees, please ask all your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. If you would like to ask your question aloud, raise your hand using the raise hand feature after you ask it in the Q&A. Otherwise, I will read your question. Our first question comes from Fuang Gomard, and it's for Jessica. When you engage with all these industries involved in the materials, what are you telling them? What is in it for them?
Sorry, say that one more time. When I'm engaging with industries about materials?
Yes, yeah. So I assume what they meant was when you're engaging with firms that are in the materials industry, what do you provide them, I suppose is what the question's getting at.
Got it. I mean, and as I mentioned earlier, when you're talking about any singular material, and just to John's comment, for example, about PET, so let's say we're talking about PET, we might be engaging with customers or with companies across a very large spectrum. Again, it could be the chemical companies, it could be packaging companies, consumer goods, retailers, haulers, MRFs, and others, right, across that entire spectrum. Their reason for creating or engaging in a more circular solution around that material might be very different. So we try to think about what is their primary reason, right, or the motivation for helping them switch from a linear system to a circular system. In some cases, it might be consumer demand, right? So especially if I'm a consumer-facing company, it might be that my customers are asking for something that is better or more recyclable or has post-consumer recycled content in it. It could be that if I'm actually the packaging folks, it could be that the consumer goods companies are asking for it, right? If I'm a retailer, it could be that my municipality or the city in which I operate or the cities in which I operate are demanding that, right? Or increasing recycling rates or have bottle bills or extended producer responsibility or something along those lines. Right. So it could be a variety of reasons. So we try to tap into, what are those driving forces or pressures that each of those companies might be facing. And then for all of them, regardless of where they sit across the value chain, it's looking for the economic value, right? And this is why circular economy is quite different than maybe some broader efforts around sustainability. And so we try to look at how does this make economic sense for you individual player within the system. And in some cases, it's what would need to be true for it to make economic sense. Meaning, do I have to get to a certain level of volume? Do I have to have a certain amount of collection? Do I have to have a certain price point for it to actually make sense?
Excellent, thank you. This next question comes from Alice Henry. I'm going to direct it to Ashleigh, but I think that we might have opinions from a lot of you on this, so feel free to jump in as well. How do we finance engaging communities in the circular economy and include circular innovations in the pathways to a just transition? Essentially, how do we fund social innovation, not just technological materials and logistics innovation?
This is a brilliant question, and one that I'm really intrigued by as well, and have been thinking about for some time. And I think, for our organization, we're very action orientated, and often we see fantastic initiatives and multiple initiatives within defined systems, within communities. And some of those in a traditional financing model will stack up and they'll get invested. And then a lot of this smaller scale initiatives that contribute social capital, they just don't get the finance that they need to scale or to have the impact or support they need to stay sustainable. So for us, we've been, over the last 12 months, really looking at a model where we're investing in defined systems, not just looking at these larger scale capital investments, but also these smaller social orientated investments where we define a system boundary. We look at a multiple field of investments. We build maybe a joint venture type of structure and model, and we look to drive investment into each part of the system, ultimately to compound the benefits and enable the system to improve as a whole. So that's something we've been working on for a while now, and we're actually very excited to be testing and exploring this with closed loop partners in the Australian market. But I think we need to change the way we look at systems and the elements within those, and ultimately we need a balance between social, environmental, and economic to have a healthy system. So we need to change our lens, and our finance community needs to come along that journey with us to do it.
Great answer. Did anyone else want to respond to that?
I'm in this call from Europe, and basically, like every other region on Earth currently, we fell into a deep pandemic crisis, and like every other country on Earth, we are currently thinking through how on earth to get out of it again. What are the different choices? And there is increasing evidence that circular economy actually ticks quite some boxes in terms, not just in terms of getting ourselves onto 1.5 degree growth or development trajectory, also in terms of how it actually might provide the employment that we need. There is some excellent new research about that, and it can also be shown that the kind of instruments that you need in order to trigger those positive outcomes in terms of VAT, in terms of providing the right infrastructure, in terms of pulling up recycled content requirements are in fact a very affordable way of creating positive social outcomes called employment. And so I think if we were smart, I think it could almost be the moment, the year in which we finally see the circularity gap closing a bit. So if there is a contradiction between economic benefits and social benefits within the concept of the circular economy. They are absolutely that is a very misleading discussion. All empirical evidence says actually it's an interesting thing to do, and for the first time I actually see both in the global south and the global north, I see a lot of that happening. There are repair quarters now, sort of, and resource camps or resource bases now starting to emerge in European cities. There are some very credible development plans for sustainable or circular economic zones in the global south. So finally, people are discovering that that is a formula that actually ticks many boxes.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. All right, now we have a question for John. On your point of the lack of infrastructure to recycle or upcycle end-of-life PET, what do you think is needed to develop this embryonic recovery/recycling infrastructure? Do you think that the developing material recovery infrastructure could lock us into a future which is still wasteful slash throughput oriented with just higher recovery levels for some materials? Or do you think it'll be truly circular?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I have an opinion, so I'll tell you what my opinion is. My opinion is not necessarily sort of the common shared wisdom, just to be clear. So don't take me as the representative of the entire PET industry on that. I'd say first, it's important to understand that PET is actually basically the best performing from a recycling and circularity perspective of almost any material out there. There are certain exclusions. Some people would argue aluminum is better. I think erroneously, people would argue that glass might be better. I think glass is actually a really bad outcome from a whole. I think it makes a bunch of bad trade-offs. So there are a couple other materials out there that you might argue are better than PET. I think it's a tough argument to make. In many cases, aluminum probably is the best one, right? So just to be clear, PET is pretty much, in my opinion, the best material that's out there. And that's why we selected it as our first product, right? It wasn't, PET is actually a little harder to make than some of the other products we could have made. So, but we thought it was the right outcome. So it's important to start from that framework and not to shoot at a product just because we think we can make it a little bit better. However, I do think we can make it a lot better. I think that one of the most important ways to make it better is to understand that the way that products are designed is a big part of what makes them easier or hard to recycle. And there are a bunch of different components to that, right? One is, can it be disassembled either by the recycler, right? Whoever's going to go and do the recycling, can the materials be separated out? So if you have multiple materials together, that's usually problematic, right? And there are a lot of considerations there. Another is, can consumers figure out that this is something that should be recycled? So is there something that, how do you signal that? One of the reasons why bottles get recycled so regularly is because people can figure out that a clear bottle is something that is generally recyclable. And so there's high recycling rate from that perspective. It's also easy for the bottle to be separated out either by human beings or by optical sensors or something like that from the rest of the waste stream. So those are both actually product design decisions before they reach anything else, right? So we often focus on the infrastructure technology or the practices, but those practices are pretty intimately related to the way that the products are designed, right? So I think design is a big part of it. And generally speaking, the more we can use single materials, the better, right? So the less composite a material is and the more homogeneous a material is, generally speaking, the easier it is to recycle. And the more things that get recycled of a particular type, right? The less you have to figure out, is it, does my aluminum go in here, but my pizza box goes in the trash and my right? The less that people, and I'll say this just both as consumers, but also the industry, right? On the back end of the recycling industry, the more that everything sort of fits into 1 or 2 or 3 buckets, and I don't have to have 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 or 25 buckets, right? In order to successfully recycle, the more recycling you're gonna get done, right? I'll give you sort of a thought experiment. If, for example, you knew that every single plastic item you touched could be recycled, right? And all of it could be recycled in the same stream, you would get vastly higher recycling rates right off the bat, just because people knew that that was something that was usable, and you'd get more aggregation, and it didn't have to be separated, so the economics were better at processing it, all those kinds of things. So this is a long way to say, I think actually having single homogeneous materials that have the fewest number of different kinds of materials in the economy broadly is generally beneficial. And I think that PET, aluminum, in particular, paper is another one, are incredibly useful products to start to sort of centralize a lot of our product design and packaging, et cetera, into as much as we can. There's some products where that makes no sense, right? We're never going to make a computer that's entirely made out of, PET, aluminum, right? There's circuits, there's all sorts of stuff that's got to go in to make it function, but that's a high value product, right? When you're looking at our broad consumption, and I call these eigen materials, right? This is my internal argument around this, or omni materials, uber materials. But these are, the idea is, can we break it down into 4 or 5 or 6 dominant materials that are easily separated and identified from each other? And if we can raise the proportion of our economy, basically, that uses those materials exclusively, it will make it dramatically easier across the board to recycle them and deal with them at end of life. And that includes the stuff that's not being used right now. For example, if you knew that all of your carpet was just PET, that's dead easy to recycle, right? The problem is you don't know if it's PET, polypropylene, nylon, right? Is there wool in it? How much is cotton? What are some of the glass fibers that are in the backing of the material, right? What are the adhesives? I can't get all that stuff apart. So it's not economic to go after it right now. If I knew that the whole thing was PET, you're in good shape. You just throw the whole thing in. That answer the question?
That was great. Jessica, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a response?
Yes, I just one thing to add to that. I agree with everything that John was saying. I think a lot of this gets back to one of your original questions, Brian, which is why do we need to take a systems-based approach to all of this? And it's systems both from that value chain perspective as well as from the materials perspective. So when we're looking at a new quote unquote circular material or better material or alternative, we always ask the question of not only is this preferred from an environmental impact perspective or health perspective in the actual material, but we also look at what happens throughout the life cycle of that material or that product, right? So if somebody is using it, what is it like during that use stage? And then what will they do with it? Will they throw it into a trash bin? Will they put it into a curbside recycling? Will they put it into the single stream even exist where they are? And then regardless of where they put it, where does it end up, right? Is it something that will actually make its way through a MRF for a recycling facility, right? Is it something that would end up in a landfill or end up in an ocean or end up in our waterways? And if it does make its way back into our system, then what can I do with it, right? Does it go back into being whatever it was before? Does it become something else? Does it become something of lower value, of greater value? And those are all the kind of questions that I think we have to ask as we're thinking about all these different alternatives or what kind of materials are preferred over others, because it's really about, one, keeping materials in play, right? Keeping them looping throughout our system as long as possible so that we basically can eliminate extraction of natural resources. And 2, it's about doing it at the highest economic value. And I'm sure that's part of what John was getting to with like kind of the glass versus aluminum versus plastics, right? And the one thing I'll add to all of this, and it gets to one of the questions around geographies that I saw in the chat, is it's hyper local. Like the answer to what makes sense really depends not just on your country, but literally where you live or where that product is going, right? Because it depends on legislation in that locality. It depends on tipping fees. It depends on whether recycling facilities even exist. If I'm talking about glass, it depends on do people sort clear versus brown versus green glass? You know, has massive implications in terms of the economics and the value of that material. So I just wanted to add that point to it, because I think that question that was asked kind of gets to the heart of why this linear to circular move is both so challenging, but why it's such an exciting opportunity, because we can all see the value in it. We just need to think about things a little bit differently.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that one of the things that you said relates well to the next question. So Ricardo Rodriguez Padilla asks, I'm curious about how much of the ultimate goal for a circular economy will involve and rely on more behavioral science, bringing in individual decisions by consumers in more versus bypassing individual consumer behavior and instead involving new materials or behind the scenes decisions by firms and other big actors. Between the economy we have today and the ideal circular economy, what seems likely to be the most successful big step? I was going to direct this towards Martin, but again, we can have someone pitch in at the end.
Yeah, look, thanks, Brian and Rodrigo. There's a superficial answer to that in order to bring a bit of heat to the conversation is consumers can't change it. Sort of travel to East Java and stand on the beaches. These are cultures that are very cleanly, very responsible in the way they're managing their resources, and still the waste ends up in the river because they are part of a global plastic value chain that doesn't provide the recovery and the waste management resources for them to dispose it differently. And so you can put all the consumer education in the world into it, as long as Jessica and John rightly said, you are sending the wrong materials with the wrong recycling economics into the system. There's very little they can do. You get something like 6 cents per kilogram for a sachet, which is a laminate, a multi-material, flexible, and you have to pick 1.5 to 2 hours for a kilogram. At the end of the day, you don't have even 50 cents, and you can't send your kids to school with that. If you have John's PET, then you get 26 cents per kilogram, and it takes you 40 minutes to pick them, and you have $5 at the end of the day, and you can send them to school. It's that easy. So it's, by the way, that also teaches us something. It's not just about recyclability, it's about recycling and recovery and circular economics that we have to look at. So they can't be circular, there can't be net zero, there can't be anything. They just have to take what they get. That's why we have to look at the whole system, and we have to particularly look at the economic incentives to the of the industry, and we have to bring in a responsibility for materials that you bring onto the market through the entire cycle, and that needs to be in a level playing field way. Now, however, the more differentiated and probably intellectually sort of better answer is, of course, there's a huge role to play for them. And the best way we can actually see that is through new delivery models. And again, sticking to plastic, we think that almost a third of the complete demand that we will have for what single-use plastic is delivering us today in 2040 through essentially dematerialized solutions, so that you get what you want, but you don't get it through plastic or even through materials at all. You just get it through what is being presented to you by packaging-free products, by dispensers, by refillers, and that is, of course, a really big question, to what extent that is something that's easily drawn onto a chart or calculated into an analysis, or whether that's real, whether there is consumer acceptance, and whether it meets the functional attributes that you rightfully need in terms of hygiene and food safety, etc. And there, I think it's very important to observe how customers really react, and all those signals that I'm getting are anything between neutral and very positive, that if you offer it in a smart way, this is in fact a very interesting way to present your products. I mean, because look at it, our products are getting better and better, more sophisticated, and all the innovation and investment on earth goes into better products to be competitive. And we still wrap it into packaging that actually doesn't meet the same, or that doesn't deliver the same consumer experience. And so actually wrapping it in, or delivering in something that is as good and as high quality as the product proposition is, by making the packaging packaging durable, by making the packaging smart, by making the packaging returnable, or by taking it away altogether in order not to diminish the consumer experience, is in fact something that is quite interesting once you understood that there is readiness on the side of consumers to accept something like that. So in a way, there is a very strong yes and a very strong no to, to the question, and sort of I'm a bit paradoxically stuck in the middle.
John, a response?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said, Martin. I think that there some of the considerations. So basically, what we have, our sort of global system is a bunch of economic optimization agents, which are companies, and we are using governments and our consumer behavior and our investment behavior, right, to set the environment inside which these economic optimization agents optimize, right? So we're setting the boundary conditions for that, the constraints inside which they're optimizing. And I think that generally speaking, those are the three different mechanisms that consumers have the ability to control, right? So one is, what do you demand? What do you consume? Which is exactly what Mark was talking about, which is if you're willing to, if people weren't interested in an iPhone that did better things, right, and behaved better and looked better and didn't crack as much and all of those kinds of things, then we wouldn't have had continued investment in that product, right? If what people valued was something that got my email to me as cheaply as it possibly could, then I would have a crappy little plastic thing in my pocket that was, maybe didn't crack when it dropped, right? But the point is, the Apple optimized around what they saw as the economic drivers for consumption for that product, right? And the same thing's going to happen with packaging and anything else. The next is, government regulations or requirements can drive companies to do these things differently. And obviously, these generally speaking, throughout the world, governments are theoretically organized to do what consumers want them to, right? The consumption of the government services. And so we have power there, whether we recognize it or not. And then the last is with the investment world, right? Generally speaking, most assets are actually held by consumers of various sorts, right? Very few assets are single point controlled funds anymore. They're often index funds, or they are sort of large aggregated vehicles like BlackRock or Fidelity or something along those lines. And those have incredible power. So I'll tell you, when Larry Fink at BlackRock told the global public equities world that he was not going to take them seriously as companies unless they took climate change seriously, they leapt to attention faster than any other action of anybody in the entire world. The reason why, I firmly believe, the reason why climate change is, and net zero is something that companies suddenly care about, is because of the letter to CEOs that Larry Fink sent out at the beginning of last year. And his number one issue was climate change. So I think, generally speaking, those are the three areas, right? What you consume, what laws and regulations and policies you put in place to define the environment, and what your demand, actually, the other way to think about it is, what is your demand for the securities, right? Securities and the ownership of those companies, which is another way of saying investment. Those are the three things. Everything else, consumers can't really do much about.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. All right, our next question goes to Ashleigh. So much of circular implementation and closed loop implementation, non-capital, sorry, Jessica, programs today are via corporate social responsibility initiatives, often offering minute changes within a corporate enterprise manufacturing systems, but offering good press. How do we move beyond implementation into actual adoption and operational shift? How does the conversation move from CSR to neutral harm system across an entire organization?
Again, I think this is another really good question, because I think people are a little bit tired of the fantastic greenwashing news story. With the work that we do with companies, I think a big lever for systemic change within that organization, but it's supply chain. Because look, if they're going to get serious about circular economy, they can't do it all, and they can't do it alone. So for us, it's about getting the diversity within the organization itself. So we typically, in our engagements, will work from the operations team, the cleaning contractors, right through to the executive and the board. There is no in between. It shouldn't be driven by one or the other. If it's going to actually achieve real change and not be a greenwash story, it needs to have a richness of diversity, a richness of their supply chain, and they actually need to set targets that we can put KPIs against and get out there and get things done. And also we take a bold approach with our clients to say, be transparent in the journey. Don't print out the media release 5 years after you started the journey when it looks perfect. Tell people the process of how you're going to actually get there, because you can learn a lot in that. And it's a really scary thing for companies to do, especially those that are a lot more public facing. They get a lot of scrutiny. However, I think we also as a society need to be a bit more accepting about the journey that companies need to go on in this transition, because it's not easy. It is really damn hard and it's complex. And as we've said, it's all about systems change, but systems change involves a lot of people and people have different value sets. So for us, diversity is the key, being transparent and sharing the journey, not waiting till you're perfect.
And Brett, if I can just add, one piece to that as well. I think the good news is we're definitely seeing that transition, right? From, especially in the corporate world, from looking at this as a philanthropic or CSR type of thing to being part of their core business. I think for some companies, COVID has raised that up as an issue, more as even a resiliency issue or as a risk, in their supply chain issue. So I think we're seeing that movement. That said, I think there's always an interesting role for philanthropy to play in this sector as well, especially when we talk about, just for example, like unproven solutions, or again, as I mentioned earlier, there's some of these topics that we just don't know yet, right? Or it's just, we don't have a great answer to them. It's not a matter of we know the right answer, we just need to scale it up. There are many, many things in that category. There's a bunch of things in this category of, it sounds really interesting, it sounds compelling, but how do we help de-risk the investments in that particular sector or in that solution? And philanthropy can play an interesting role there. I think another potential area, and I saw a question as I was scrolling through the questions around this as well, is a role for philanthropy to play in a just transition. We know that not everybody is going to transition from linear to circular, just like transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy. That's not all going to happen at the same time and at the same pace. So I think there's a really interesting role potentially to play there. And then we know that there's a really interesting connection between, and I think Martin referenced this earlier, between circular economy, climate, and all of our climate impacts and environmental justice, and really looking at the justice lens to all of this as well. So I bring that up just because I think there is a really interesting role for the philanthropic sector to play in here, whether it's corporate philanthropy or foundations or governments. And then once we do know the right answer, it must be core business, right? Especially if you're going to scale it to the level it needs to be scaled to actually make a difference.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica. This will be our last Q&A question, and then we're going to do a round of closing statements. So this is for Martin. What kind of rate of return are you seeing on your investments? And is the need here patient capital, or is the current rate of return competitive with traditional investments? And actually, that's probably good for Martin, Jessica, and Ashleigh.
I can't disclose the rate of return on our investments, but we are quite happy. And I find that logically quite conclusive, because in a way, getting circular is a wonderful way to take systemic risk out of a larger portfolio. It's a wonderful way to get out of completely uncontrolled volatile commodity markets. It's a wonderful way to stay close to your customer. It's a wonderful way to control the real total cost of ownership of the products that you sell. So it is absolutely liked by rule makers around the world, from China to Japan to Canada to Australia, increasingly to Europe through the Circular Economy Action Plan. So you don't have to be overly ideological to see the upsides. It's hard to invest into this space because sort of it's not the investment strategy can't be one of asset picking. So here's the one technology that pulls us out. And with John having been in this sort of for so long, I'm sure you might agree, this is not just about having a smart technological idea. It's really about getting demand supply flywheel spinning, which is hard work. And so you need to have a theory of the market. You need to have a theory of change in which you are entering this, which is something which sometimes is beyond the scrutiny of a normal investment team. So you need to have a bit of pattern recognition. But otherwise, I happen to think it's a very safe domain to look for high return investments.
I agree since completely. I think there is a place for what we call like catalytic or impact first and investments as well. So we have one of our funds, actually our first fund, is called the Closed Loop Infrastructure Fund, and it's specifically for that kind of catalytic impact first, below market rate loans for literally building out infrastructure that's needed for the entire system to function. And that's why we have a separate fund there, and then venture, and then growth, and then private equity, right? But completely agree with Martin's points. This is, I think for this to scale and for this to actually work, you have to be able to compete in that broader market.
Great. And we're coming close to time. Ashleigh, I do want to get your thoughts on that, but maybe you can include them in your closing comments. So panelists will have about 1 minute to give a final thought on the topics discussed today. You can discuss anything you like, but if you'd like a prompt, perhaps discuss what are the biggest opportunities or biggest barriers to scaling circular economy business models. And we'll start with Ashleigh.
Okay, great. There's a heap of questions in there that are brilliant, and maybe I'll make my remarks into some of those or related to some of those. I think from my journey, taking action toward a circular economy, again, noting that it's not just about one sole company, one sole government, or it is that systems-led approach. I think I want to encourage people in that chat function that are asking questions around finance and how do they get the support they need for their initiatives, etc., is really to find the person or the company or entity of the problem that you're really solving, because that's your value proposition. Start building out that narrative around, we're actually addressing this for you. Be bold and brave as well, and don't necessarily believe you need to wait for that finance. If you can get things done today, get them done, because it'll build confidence in the narrative on the value of a circular economy, and you're going to be a whole lot better off when you go into a room to actually get successful and finance for your project, your initiative, your startup. So I think it's about systems change, be bold, be curious, and just get out there and take action toward a circular economy.
Great, thank you, Ashleigh. Now we'll go to John.
Yeah, sure. It's a really interesting question. I think some of the biggest opportunities are really, I think in the circular economy, they tend to be somewhat invisible or hidden, maybe is a better way to describe it. And I think that the opportunity actually comes from understanding, to Martin's point earlier, understanding the system or having a theory of the system that leads you to conclude that there is a particular kind of opportunity, and then testing whether that opportunity is in fact there or not. And then I think that the path to growth there is, how do you find, don't look at it from the largest scale in. I would start at a small, personally, I would start at a small scale, understand that opportunity, and then see how you can, that build sort of a platform for you to grow off of. So I say all that, and I'll make an analogy to an environment that I think is probably more familiar for the broader economy, which is this sort of software is eating the world thesis. So this was a thesis that was developed by Andreessen Horowitz, or specifically Mark Andreessen, about 10 years ago, give or take now. And it's basically been the thesis for tech investing for about a decade, right? Maybe more than that, a decade and a half. And if you think about it from, if you went back to the beginning when he proposed that hypothesis, I think that what you would find is there were people trying to build like a grand unified theory of how tech and software should infiltrate and change the way that we operate our economy as a species, right? And almost invariably, those would have been wrong, right? Because you can't really build a grand unified theory of a system that's this complex and dynamic. And I think the canonical mistake for people entering into the circular economy is they're entering by thinking they need to build that grand unified theory, and that leads to crackpots almost invariably, right? And so what you really have to do is, just like in software, right? You need to find a discrete, specific opportunity that you can unpack, build a theory around it, and then you ultimately turn that into your sort of platform or your change agent or whatever it is, and you can drive systemic change from there. But I think that part of the problem is that because this is a systemic problem, people think that the solution needs to start at the highest, most abstract systemic level, and I think that's just not right. It leads to solutions that look good in paper and are totally impractical.
Great. Thank you, John. Speaking of systemic, we'll go to Martin next.
Yeah, look, let me not end before giving a real compliment to Ashleigh and to Jessica, who and closed loop partners, and your work is of course very close to us, and also to John for the work that they are doing. I might a lot has been said about where the next opportunities are. Let me say something about how it looks like if these all of a sudden these opportunities become real. That's the reason why probably we are on this video conference, are quite interested in the circular economy. We always found it intellectually intriguing, at least I did, but then it never really happened. And we always said, look, there needs to be a perfect framework of the right incentives, resource taxes, carbon taxes, recycled content, eco-design. And we couldn't really imagine how all of that could come together. But now for the first time, we actually see how a circular economy is coming together, because there are some places where we start seeing a pressure point. We see it in consumer plastic, and it's too evident to talk about. We see it in batteries, because all of a sudden we don't know where we're getting the materials from unless we turn circular. We see it in steel, aluminium, cement, and petrochem, because for the first time we understand it's the only way on Earth to decarbonize in a way that makes us consistent with 1.5 degree trajectory. We see it in food waste, because for the first time there is such an ethical burden on us, on industry. And all of a sudden, even without this big sort of the bigger scheme of things coming together, all of a sudden you start people acting really as if there was a value in the circular economy. And my God, how fundamental and even fast sometimes those changes are. And we should expect more of that. In 5 years' time, when we have our reunion, we will see an automotive company that has, or automotive industry rather, where being circular is the new norm. Where getting your cars back and designing them in such a way in the first place, and making sure that you're not selling them, but you're only giving them away for some time because you want them back, apart from the fact that you want all the data and the consumer intimacy that comes with it. I think more and more industries all of a sudden will recognize what a beneficial concept actually circular management can be.
Excellent, thank you, Martin. And then we go to Jessica.
Great. Now, and I know that we're over time, so I'll just end with saying, you know, I'm actually very, very optimistic right now, and I think we can all agree that this last year has taught us a lot, or I've learned a lot over the last year, and I think one of the things we've learned is that we just need to be a lot more resilient than as a global society than we maybe are today, and we also learned that if we want to change something, we can, right? So if you look at the magnitude is what has happened, good and bad, over the last year. It's pretty amazing when we decided, hey, we need to do X, we need to change these supply chains, we need to change our businesses, we need to get vaccines. You know, that was a pretty amazing example of how we can actually come together and solve problems. Like, that's actually something we can do. I think people started getting a better appreciation of the things in their lives and what matters and maybe what doesn't matter. We have a new appreciation of waste and making sure we're not wasting as much. I think governments have a better appreciation of the levers that they can pull as well. So I think we're going to see a lot more circular economy focused initiatives as part of recovery plans, Build Back Better, that type of thing. I think companies got a sense of both their relationships and their commitments with consumers and this kind of new social contract. And they also got a better sense of, you know, how they can leverage things like these new circular models or as a service and things like that over this last year to build those stronger relationships with customers. So I say all that just because I never would have predicted this clearly a year and a half ago. But I think there's this moment in time that we have coming out of this pandemic that will be both critical to our recovery, but also a moment in time where I think we have the sense of a collective desire for a better future type of thing, right? So I say all that just because I'm actually very, very optimistic.
Glad to hear. I think we need that optimism right now. All right, and with that, I believe we are a few minutes past time. Sorry about that, everyone who attended. I would like to thank all of the panelists again for taking time away from your critical work to join the Harvard Circular Economy Symposium and Harvard Business School's Business and Environment Initiative for this event. And thanks to everyone who attended today.